Montana Territory, 1873. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the bustling streets of Helena, where dust from the main thoroughfare settled on everything it touched. The frontier town stood like an island of civilization in a sea of wilderness, promising opportunity to those bold enough to seek it, and anonymity to those desperate to escape their pasts. Willow Hayes tugged her cloak tighter around her shoulders as she descended the stagecoach steps, her 22-year-old frame tense with vigilance. Her honey-blonde hair was tucked neatly beneath a modest bonnet, and her green traveling dress, though well-made, showed signs of a long journey. She clutched a small valise containing everything she owned in the world, which wasn't much. The weight of the hidden money belt around her waist reminded her that she couldn't afford to trust anyone, not in Helena, not anywhere. "Last stop before continuing to Fort Benton tomorrow," called the driver. "Be back here at 7 sharp or we leave without you." Willow had no intention of spending more than one night in this town. Fort Benton was just another stepping stone, then the Dakota Territory, and finally east to Chicago or perhaps all the way to New York, somewhere big enough to disappear, somewhere far from Texas and the ghosts that haunted her there. "Trust gets you killed out west," her father had told her before a bullet silenced him forever. The memory of that night 2 months ago still burned fresh in her mind, the shouting, the gunshots, her mother's screams, and then the terrible silence that followed. The men who murdered her parents had worn badges, but they weren't lawmen, not really, just wolves in sheep's clothing, and they'd be looking for her still, the only witness to their crimes. Willow had learned her lesson well. Survival meant staying alone, staying moving, and never letting anyone close enough to betray you. The frontier was no place for softness. No place for a woman without protection, except the kind she carried concealed in her right boot. She made her way toward the Copper Mountain Hotel, a 2-story establishment that looked clean enough for a night's rest. Her gaze darted from face to face, searching for any sign of recognition or threat, so intent on her surveillance that she nearly collided with a tall figure rounding the corner. "Beg your pardon, ma'am," came a deep voice as strong hands steadied her shoulders to prevent the collision. Willow stepped back immediately, her hand instinctively reaching for her boot before she caught herself. She looked up into the face of a young man whose appearance startled her with its openness. Landon Kane stood a good foot taller than her, with broad shoulders tapering to a lean waist. His face was clean-shaven and tanned from long days in the saddle, with lines around his blue eyes that suggested he smiled often. He couldn't have been more than 26, yet there was something in those eyes, a steadiness, a certainty about himself, that made him seem more grounded than his years might suggest. "No harm done," Willow replied curtly, stepping aside to pass. "You look like you could use some direction," he said, not moving, new to Helena. "Just passing through," she answered, the practiced lie coming easily. "And I don't need help." Landon raised his hands in a gesture of peace, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Fair enough, though if you're looking for lodging, I'd avoid the Copper Mountain. They had bedbugs last month. The Silver Dollar Inn down the street is cleaner." Before Willow could respond, a shout came from the direction of the sheriff's office. "Kane, got that fence wire you ordered from back east." "Much obliged," he called back, then tipped his hat to Willow. "Good day to you, ma'am." As he strode away, Willow couldn't help but notice the easy way he moved, like a man comfortable in his own skin. His clothes were practical, worn boots, denim trousers, a blue cotton shirt, and a vest, but clean and well kept. Not a drifter then, a rancher probably, or working for one. She redirected her steps toward the Silver Dollar Inn, irritated with herself for taking his advice but not foolish enough to ignore practical information. The brief encounter had unsettled her more than it should have. It had been weeks since anyone had looked at her directly, spoken to her with such frank openness. It reminded her of how isolated she'd become, a lone figure skimming across the surface of towns, never touching down long enough to leave an impression. That night, as she lay in her room at the Silver Dollar, which was indeed clean and reasonably priced, Willow stared at the ceiling and calculated the days until she could reach New York, where she might finally stop running. But something about the land she'd crossed, the vast prairies, the distant mountains, the wild openness of it all, had stirred something in her she hadn't expected, a longing perhaps for something permanent, something like home. "Don't be a fool," she whispered to herself in the darkness. "The only permanent thing out here is the grave." Morning came with a cry that jolted Willow from sleep, her hand already reaching for her pistol before her eyes were fully open. Outside her window, a commotion had broken out on the street. men shouting, horses whinnying in distress. She dressed hastily and peered through the curtains to see a rider galloping into town, his horse lathered with sweat. "Sioux raiding party hit the McLaren homestead," the man was shouting. "They're heading south toward the Benton Road." The Benton Road, her intended route. Willow's heart sank as she watched the town erupt into activity, men grabbing rifles, the sheriff organizing a posse. Her stagecoach would certainly be delayed, perhaps for days if the situation was serious. When she descended to the inn's small dining room, the atmosphere was tense with news of the raid. 3 settlers dead, others wounded. The stagecoach to Fort Benton was indeed canceled until further notice. "How long?" she asked the innkeeper, a portly woman named Mrs. Finch. "Could be days, could be a week," the woman replied with a sympathetic frown. "The army's been stretched thin with all these treaties being negotiated. Not enough soldiers to go around." Willow felt the panic rising in her throat. She couldn't stay in one place for a week. It was too risky. Someone from Texas might pass through, recognize her name, ask questions. Or worse, one of the men who'd killed her parents might have followed her trail. "Is there another way north?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Well, there's a wagon train leaving for the Judith Basin in 2 days, Mrs. Finch offered. "That's northwest, not quite to Fort Benton, but it gets you moving in the right direction. They're always looking for cooks and such for the journey." It wasn't ideal, but it was better than waiting in Helena. Willow thanked the woman and set out to find the wagon master, securing a position as an assistant to the camp cook in exchange for passage. She spent the day purchasing additional supplies and tried not to think about the delay to her plans. That evening, returning to the inn with her purchases, she nearly collided again with Landon Kane as he exited the mercantile, his arms full of supplies. "We seem destined to meet at doorways," he said, his smile warm despite the tension in town. "Mr. Kane," she acknowledged, stepping back. "You heard about the road north?" he asked, his expression growing serious. "I did. I've arranged to join the Judith Basin wagon train." Something flickered across his face, concern perhaps. "Alone, that's a rough journey, especially now with the tensions rising." "I can take care of myself," she replied, more sharply than she'd intended. Instead of taking offense, he nodded thoughtfully. "I don't doubt that, but there's a difference between surviving and living, Miss Hayes," she supplied, then immediately regretted it. Willow Hayes. "Miss Hayes," he seemed to savor the name. "I'm heading back to my ranch tomorrow. It's on the way to the Judith Basin. If you'd consider it, you'd be welcome to ride along with me and my men, safer than waiting for the wagon train, and we'd get you there quicker." The offer caught her off guard. It was practical, logical even, but accepting help from a stranger went against every instinct she'd cultivated over the past months. "Why would you offer that to someone you don't know?" she asked, searching his face for any sign of hidden motives. "Because it's what neighbors do out here," he said simply. "The frontier's hard enough without turning away from each other." His words struck a chord she hadn't expected. For months, she'd been telling herself that isolation was her only protection. But looking at Landon Kane, at the straightforward decency in his face, she felt the first crack in her certainty. "I'll think about it," she said finally, which was more than she'd given anyone else since Texas. He nodded, seeming to understand the concession she'd made. "I'll be at the livery at dawn. 4 of my hands will be with me. You're welcome to join us if you decide to." As he walked away, Willow found herself watching him longer than was necessary. There was something about Landon Kane that didn't fit with her view of the world, a simple goodness that challenged her hard-won cynicism. That night, weighing her options in the solitude of her room, Willow made a decision that would alter the course of her life. Dawn found her at the livery, a small pack of belongings over her shoulder, waiting as Landon and his men prepared to ride out. The surprise on his face when he saw her was quickly replaced by a smile that reached his eyes. "Miss Hayes," he greeted her. "Glad you decided to join us." He introduced her to his ranch hands, Jake, an older man with a weathered face, the Wilson brothers, Tom and Sam, barely out of their teens, and Miguel, a quiet Mexican cowboy who nodded politely. None of them questioned her presence, taking their cue from Landon's easy acceptance. They provided her with a gentle mare named Daisy, and when Landon noticed her uncertain handling of the reins, he spent a few patient minutes showing her how to guide the horse properly. "Ever ridden before?" he asked without judgment. "Not since I was a child," she admitted. "You'll do fine," he assured her. "Daisy knows the way better than most people." As they rode out of Helena, Willow felt a strange mix of anxiety and relief. She was moving again, which was good, but she was also entrusting her safety to strangers, something she'd sworn never to do. The day's journey took them through rolling hills dotted with ponderosa pines. Landon rode beside her, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the territory. Despite herself, Willow found his company unexpectedly comfortable. He didn't press her with questions about her past or her plans, instead filling the air with tales of Montana and his life as a rancher. "My father claimed this land 7 years ago," he explained as they crested a hill. "I was 19, fresh from Ohio with nothing but big dreams. Pa passed 2 years back, left me the place. It's good land, a valley with a year-round creek, enough grass for 100 head of cattle, timber for building. The kind of place a man can build a future on." There was pride in his voice, not boastful but deep and genuine. It stirred something in Willow, a memory of her own father speaking of their Texas farm with the same pride before everything went so terribly wrong. "You have family with you?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. A shadow crossed his face. "Not anymore. Ma died of fever our second winter here. My sister married a storekeeper in Helena last year. It's just me in the hands now." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "and about 87 of the most stubborn cattle God ever put on this earth." By nightfall, they made camp in a sheltered grove near a small stream. The men worked with practiced efficiency, setting up a simple camp, starting a fire, and preparing a meal of beans, bacon, and coffee. Willow insisted on helping, not wanting to be seen as a burden, and found herself working alongside Miguel to prepare the food. As they sat around the fire after eating, the conversation flowed easily among the men, talk of cattle prices, the coming winter, news from distant settlements. Willow remained quiet, watching the interplay of these people who clearly trusted each other with their lives. It had been so long since she'd felt part of any group that the simple camaraderie around the fire felt almost like a physical warmth. "What takes you to the Judith Basin, Miss Hayes?" Jake, the oldest cowhand, finally asked her directly. Not many young ladies traveling that direction alone. Willow had prepared for such questions. "My cousin has a millinery shop in Fort Benton. I'm going to work with her." The lie came smoothly, but she noticed Landon watching her with those perceptive blue eyes. He didn't contradict her, but something in his expression suggested he sensed the falsehood. "You picked a hard time to travel," Jake continued. "These Indian troubles have everyone on edge." "The newspapers make it sound worse than it is," Landon interjected. "Most tribes just want to be left alone to live as they always have. It's when promises get broken that trouble starts." There was something in his tone, a fairness, a refusal to paint all with the same brush, that caught Willow's attention. In Texas, she'd rarely heard anyone speak of Indians with such measured respect. As the others turned in for the night, Willow found herself sitting beside the fire with Landon, the silence between them surprisingly comfortable. "Thank you," she said finally, "for allowing me to join you." "No need for thanks. The road's safer with more eyes watching." She studied his profile in the firelight. "You're not what I expected to find out here." A smile touched his lips. "What did you expect?" "I don't know, someone harder. Less willing to help a stranger." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "The frontier makes some men harder, that's true. Makes others realize we need each other more, not less." He glanced at her. "What about you? What brought you west in the first place?" The question was innocent enough, but it touched too close to the truths she couldn't share. Willow stiffened, the familiar walls rising again. "It's late," she said, standing abruptly. "I should get some rest." If he was offended by her sudden withdrawal, he didn't show it. "Of course, sleep well, Miss Hayes." She retreated to the small tent the men had set up for her, but sleep was long in coming. Landon Kane's words echoed in her mind. "The frontier makes some men harder, makes others realize we need each other more." She wondered which it had made of her. The next day brought them deeper into the Montana wilderness. The landscape opened up before them, vast and untamed, with the distant mountains a purple smudge against the horizon. Willow found herself relaxing into the rhythm of travel, the steady motion of the horse beneath her becoming almost soothing. They stopped at midday beside a clear stream for a brief rest. As the men tended to the horses, Willow wandered a short distance away, finding a flat rock by the water's edge where she could sit and stretch her sore muscles. The solitude was a relief after hours in company, A snapping twig alerted her to someone's approach. She turned to see Landon, carrying a canteen. "Thought you might be thirsty," he said, offering it to her. She accepted with a nod of thanks, watching as he settled on a nearby rock. For a moment neither spoke, both looking out at the water rushing over smooth stones. "You're running from something," he said finally, his voice gentle but direct. "I don't need to know what it is, but I want you to know you're safe with us." Willow's hand tightened around the canteen. "What makes you say that?" "The way you watch every stranger like they might draw on you. The way you keep your back to walls. The fact that you're traveling alone through dangerous country." His eyes met hers. "I recognize the signs, Miss Hayes. I've seen them before." She should have denied it, maintained her story. Instead, she found herself asking, "In who?" "My sister after she escaped her first husband." His jaw tightened slightly. "Some men aren't what they seem. She found that out the hard way." The parallel to her own situation, the betrayal by men who wore badges but served only themselves, struck too close to home. Willow looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "Your sister," she said softly, "is she all right now?" Landon's expression softened. "She is, found a good man eventually, one who treats her like she deserves." He paused. "Whatever you're running from, Miss Hayes, I hope you find your peace too." Before she could respond, a shout came from the camp. Tom Wilson was pointing at something in the distance. Landon was on his feet immediately, hand dropping to the revolver at his hip. "Stay here," he told Willow, his voice suddenly commanding as he strode back to the others. Willow ignored the instruction, following quickly. As she reached the camp, she saw what had caused the alarm, a thin column of smoke rising from beyond the next ridge, too concentrated to be a prairie fire. "Could be a settler's cabin," Jake suggested. "Or a trap," Miguel countered, his hand resting on his rifle. Landon considered for only a moment. "We need to check, might be someone needs help." He turned to Willow. "Miss Hayes, you should." "I'm coming with you," she interrupted. The determination in her voice left no room for argument. To his credit, Landon merely nodded. "Stay close to me, then." They approached the ridge cautiously, leaving the horses with Sam while the rest proceeded on foot. When they crested the hill, the scene below stole Willow's breath. A small homestead, its cabin still standing but the barn engulfed in flames. A wagon lay overturned in the yard, its contents scattered. There was no sign of movement. "Careful," Landon murmured, drawing his revolver as they descended toward the cabin. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Willow's hand slipped to her boot, drawing her own small pistol. The action didn't escape Landon's notice, but he said nothing. They found the first body near the overturned wagon, a man in his 40s, his unseeing eyes staring at the sky, a bullet wound in his chest. Nearby lay a second man, younger, similarly killed. Both wore the simple clothes of settlers. "Indians didn't do this," Jake said, kneeling beside one body. "These are bullet wounds, not arrows." "And nothing's been taken." Willow felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. The scene was too familiar, not Indians on a raid, but something more calculated, more deliberate. "Check the cabin," Landon ordered, his voice tight. Inside, they found a woman, alive but barely, wounded in the shoulder and losing blood rapidly. Miguel, who had some experience with treating injuries, immediately set to work trying to staunch the bleeding. "Badges," the woman whispered as Landon knelt beside her. They wore badges, but they weren't lawmen. Willow felt the blood drain from her face, the same words she'd have used to describe her parents' killers. "How many?" Landon asked urgently. "Which way did they go?" "4 men." Heading north, the woman managed before losing consciousness. Landon's face hardened. "Jake, you and Miguel stay with her. Do what you can. Tom, ride for the nearest settlement and bring help." He looked at Willow. "We should get you somewhere safe." "No," she interrupted, her voice stalely. "Those men, they might be the same ones I'm running from." The admission hung in the air between them. Landon studied her face for a long moment, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Texas?" he asked quietly. She nodded, surprised he'd made the connection so quickly. "There's been talk." A group of false lawmen preying on settlers, moving north when things got too hot for them. He held her gaze. "What did they do to you?" "They murdered my parents." The words felt strange to say aloud after months of keeping them buried. "I saw their faces. I'm the only witness who could identify them." Understanding transformed his expression. "And now they're here, in Montana territory." I can't run anymore, Willow said, surprised by the resolve in her own voice. If it's them, I need to know. For a moment she thought he would refuse, would insist on sending her to safety. Instead, he gave a single nod. We follow their trail, but carefully. First sign of trouble, we pull back and get help. His eyes held hers. I won't let anything happen to you, Miss Hayes, that's a promise. It was the kind of promise she'd stopped believing in months ago, yet something in his steady gaze made her want to trust him. The realization was as frightening as it was exhilarating. They rode north, following the clear tracks of 4 horsemen who had made no effort to hide their trail. The terrain grew rougher, rocky outcroppings and scattered pine groves replacing the open grasslands. Landon led with Sam and Willow following, all 3 alert for any sign of ambush. As dusk approached, they spotted a campfire's glow in a sheltered hollow ahead. Dismounting, they approached on foot, using the boulders for cover until they could see the camp below. 4 men seated around a fire, bottles passing between them, their horses tethered nearby. Can you see their faces? Landon whispered. Willow strained to make out the features in the fading light and flickering fire. One man turned, his profile illuminated, and she felt a jolt of recognition. That one, she breathed. The tall one with the beard, that's Crawford. He was there the night my parents were killed. Landon's jaw tightened. You're certain? I'll never forget his face or his voice. The memory of that night flashed through her mind, Crawford standing over her father's body, laughing as he collected his pocket watch. We're outnumbered, Sam murmured, and they're armed to the teeth. Landon studied the camp, his expression calculating. We need to get back, bring more men. The territorial marshal has a detachment in Helena. By then they'll be gone, Willow interrupted. And they'll keep killing, like they killed my parents, like they killed those settlers today. We can't take on 4 armed men by ourselves, Landon reasoned. That's not justice, it's suicide. As they debated, their attention fixed on the camp below, none of them noticed the figure approaching from behind until it was too late. The cold press of a gun barrel against Willow's neck froze her in place. Well, well, came a voice she'd hoped never to hear again. Look what we found skulking around our camp. Crawford's partner, a thin man with a pockmarked face whom she knew only as Reeves, had circled behind them while they were distracted. Before anyone could react, he disarmed Landon and Sam, keeping his gun trained on Willow. Get up slow, he ordered. Any sudden moves and the lady gets a bullet first. They complied, hands raised. Reeves marched them down to the camp, where the other 3 men rose to greet them with malicious grins. Look what I found spying on us, boys, Reeves announced proudly. Crawford approached, his eyes narrowing as he studied Willow's face. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by a smile that sent ice through her veins. Well, if it isn't the Hayes girl from down Texas way, he drawled. Been looking for you for a while now, Missy. You've led us quite a chase. You murdered my parents, Willow said, her voice steadier than she felt. Your pa should have minded his own business, Crawford replied coldly, sticking his nose where it didn't belong, threatening to go to the federal marshal about our business arrangements. He circled her slowly. And now here you are, all the way in Montana, still causing problems. Let her go, Landon interjected, drawing Crawford's attention. She's no threat to you. Crawford laughed. No threat. She's the only witness who can put us at the scene of those Texas killings. She's a very big threat indeed. He turned to his companions. Tie them up. We'll deal with them proper in the morning. The men bound their wrists tightly and forced them to sit against a large boulder at the edge of the camp. Crawford assigned 1 man to guard them while the others continued drinking and discussing their plans, which Willow realized with growing horror included robbing a gold shipment coming from the mines near Helena. Hours passed. The guard changed twice, but there was always at least 1 man watching them, rifle ready. Beside her, Landon worked subtly at his bonds, trying to loosen them without drawing attention. I'm sorry, Willow whispered. This is my fault. You shouldn't be involved. Don't apologize, he murmured back. Those men killed innocent people today. They'd have killed more if we hadn't found them. His eyes met hers in the darkness. Besides, I chose to help you. No regrets about that. Even facing death, his steadfastness amazed her. For so long, she'd believed that trusting others was a weakness she couldn't afford. Now, paradoxically, it was Landon's trust in her, his willingness to stand beside her despite the danger, that gave her strength. If we get out of this, she said softly, I want you to know that meeting you, it changed something in me. Something I thought was broken for good. A small smile touched his lips. When we get out of this, he corrected, you can tell me all about it over a proper dinner at my ranch. His confidence was contagious. Willow found herself believing they might actually survive, a dangerous hope, but one she clung to as the night deepened around them. Near midnight, their opportunity came. The guard watching them, the youngest of the four, had been drinking heavily. His head began to nod, then finally dropped to his chest as sleep overcame him. The other three men were wrapped in their bedrolls some distance away, their snores audible in the quiet night. Landon had managed to work one hand free from his bonds. With agonizing slowness, he untied Willow, then Sam. They crept toward the sleeping guard, relieving him of his weapons before Landon rendered him unconscious with a swift blow. "Get to the horses," Landon whispered, quietly. They were halfway to the picket line when disaster struck. Sam's foot dislodged a stone, sending it tumbling down the slight incline with a clatter that seemed deafening in the night silence. One of the sleeping men stirred, then sat up with a shout as he spotted them. "They're escaping. Get up, you fools." The camp erupted into chaos. Crawford and his men scrambled for their weapons, while Landon, Willow, and Sam ran for the horses. Gunshots split the night, bullets kicking up dirt around them. Sam reached the horses first, cutting them loose from the picket line. Willow swung herself onto one, thanking Providence for the riding lessons of the past 2 days. Landon mounted another, but before Sam could reach the third, a bullet found him. He fell with a cry that pierced Willow's heart. "Go." Landon shouted to her, "Ride north, I'll get Sam." "I won't leave you," she called back, drawing the pistol they'd taken from the guard. "Trust me," he insisted. "Meet at the crossing we passed earlier, now go." "Trust me." 2 simple words that asked everything of her. For a moment she hesitated, then spurred her horse forward, galloping into the darkness as more shots rang out behind her. She rode hard for what seemed like hours, eventually finding the creek crossing Landon had mentioned. Tying her horse to a tree, she took cover among the rocks, pistol ready, and waited in an agony of uncertainty. Dawn was breaking when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She raised her gun, then lowered it with a sob of relief as Landon appeared, supporting a pale but conscious Sam before him on the horse. "You're alive," she breathed as they reached her. Barely, Landon grimaced, helping Sam down. "Bullet grazed his side, but he'll live. Crawford and his men are right behind us, though. We need to keep moving." They rode west, pushing their tired horses as hard as they dared. By mid-morning, they reached a ridge overlooking a valley Willow hadn't seen before. Below them stretched a peaceful scene, a modest ranch house with a barn and corral, cattle grazing on the surrounding grasslands, a creek winding through the property. "My ranch," Landon explained as they paused to rest the horses. "We'll be safe there, my men will help us, and Crawford won't expect us to stop running." They made their way down to the ranch, where Landon's remaining hands reacted with shock to their leader's bloodied appearance and Sam's wound. Within minutes they were inside the ranch house, doors barred, rifles ready at the windows, while one man rode for the nearest settlement to bring help. As the ranch cook tended to Sam's injury, Willow found herself in the ranch house kitchen with Landon, helping him clean a bullet graze on his arm that he'd neglected to mention. "You should have told me you were hit," she scolded gently, washing away the dried blood. "Didn't seem important at the time," he replied with a slight smile. "Besides, compared to what Crawford will do if he finds us, this is nothing." The mention of Crawford sobered them both. Willow's hand stilled on his arm. "They won't stop looking for me," she said quietly. "Not ever. As long as I'm alive, I'm a threat to them." Landon covered her hand with his own. "Then we stop them first, permanently." "How? They're killers." "They have badges, even if they're false ones. Who would believe us over them?" "I have an idea about that." He stood, crossing to a desk in the corner of the room. From it, he withdrew a folded newspaper. "This came in the last mail delivery before I left for Helena." He handed it to her. Willow unfolded it to find a wanted poster printed within the pages, a crude drawing of 4 men, including recognizable likenesses of Crawford and Reeves. The text described them as wanted for murder, theft, and impersonating federal officers, with a substantial reward offered for their capture. "The territorial marshal issued this last week," Landon explained. "Seems their reputation finally caught up with them. Every lawman in Montana will be looking for them now." Willow stared at the poster, hardly daring to believe what it meant. "So if we can hold them off until help arrives." Then it's over, he finished for her. You can stop running. The realization washed over her like a wave, the possibility of freedom, of safety, after months of constant fear. She looked up at Landon, seeing in his face a promise of something she'd thought forever lost to her, a future. The moment was shattered by a shout from outside. Through the window, they could see dust rising on the road leading to the ranch, riders approaching fast. They found us, Landon said grimly, reaching for his rifle. The next hours passed in a blur of tension and preparation. Crawford and his 3 remaining men took positions around the ranch, occasionally firing at the house to keep those inside pinned down. Landon's 5 ranch hands, along with Sam, Willow, and Landon himself, returned fire when they could, trying to conserve ammunition. They're waiting for dark, Landon observed as afternoon waned. They'll try to rush the house then, or set it afire to drive us out. How long until help could arrive? Willow asked, checking the ammunition for her pistol. If Tom reached Helena yesterday evening and if they rode out immediately, sometime tomorrow maybe. His expression was grim. We need to hold out through the night. As darkness fell, Crawford called out from his position behind the barn. Kane, send out the Hayes girl and we'll let the rest of you live. Keep her and you'll all die tonight. Landon didn't hesitate. You're a dead man walking, Crawford. The territorial marshal has warrants for all of you. Best thing you can do now is ride away while you still can. Crawford's response was a volley of bullets that splintered the window frame beside them. I guess that's a no, Landon muttered, ducking down. The night descended into a deadly game of cat and mouse. Crawford's men attempted to approach the house twice, only to be driven back by accurate fire from the defenders, but each exchange depleted their limited ammunition, and by midnight the situation looked dire. We have maybe 20 rounds left between us, one of the ranch hands reported, not enough to hold them off much longer. Landon's face was streaked with sweat and gunpowder, but his eyes remained clear and determined as he considered their options. Finally, he turned to Willow. There's a root cellar under the pantry floor, he said quietly. If things go badly, I want you to hide there. They might not find you. She stared at him in disbelief. You think I'd hide while you and your men die fighting my battle? It's not just your battle anymore, he replied, his voice gentle, but I need to know you'll be safe. I've been running and hiding for months, she said, gripping his arm. I won't do it anymore, not from them. Not from anything, she took a deep breath. Whatever happens, we face it together. The conviction in her voice must have reached him, because after a moment he nodded. Together, then. A crashing sound from the back of the house interrupted them. Crawford's men had broken through the kitchen door. The next minutes were chaos as the battle moved inside the ranch house itself. Gunshots echoed through the rooms, furniture was overturned for cover, men shouted in pain and anger. Willow found herself cornered in the study with Landon as Crawford himself approached, pistol raised. Blood stained his shirt. He'd been hit at some point during the fight, but not badly enough to stop him. End of the line, he snarled, his face twisted with hatred. You've been a mighty expensive problem, Miss Hayes. It's over, Crawford, Landon said, stepping slightly in front of Willow despite her attempt to prevent him. Even if you kill us, you can't escape what's coming for you. Crawford's finger tightened on the trigger. Maybe not, but I'll take satisfaction in. The window behind him shattered as a bullet struck him square in the back. Crawford's expression froze in surprise before he collapsed forward, dead before he hit the floor. Through the broken window, Willow could see riders approaching the ranch, a dozen men led by a figure in a marshal's coat. The territorial law had arrived, and with them, the end of her long nightmare. The aftermath unfolded with surprising swiftness. Crawford and one of his men were dead, the other 2 captured. The marshal took statements from Willow and Landon about both the Texas murders and the recent homestead attack. With the wanted poster already circulating and multiple witnesses to their crimes, the surviving false lawmen would face justice at last. As dawn broke over the ranch, Willow stood on the porch, watching the marshal's men depart with their prisoners. Landon joined her, his arm in a fresh bandage. It's really over, she said softly, still hardly able to believe it. Yes, he agreed. You're free, Willow, free to go wherever you want. She turned to look at him, this man who had risked everything to help a stranger, who had shown her that trust wasn't always a path to betrayal. In his face she saw possibilities she'd thought forever closed to her. What if I don't want to go anywhere? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He took her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. Then I'd say this ranch could use a woman's touch. It's a hard life, but a good one, and it might be better shared. Are you proposing, Mr. Kane? She asked, a smile touching her lips for what felt like the first time in years. Not yet, he replied with an answering smile, but I'm considering it strongly, if you're amenable to the idea. Willow looked out over the ranch, the land that Landon loved, that he had built with his own hands. Then she looked back at the man himself, seeing in him everything she had stopped believing existed: honor, kindness, strength without cruelty. I might be, she said, very amenable indeed. He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, but Willow rose to meet him. Their kiss was gentle, tentative at first, then deepening with a promise of all that might come. When they finally parted, Landon kept her hand in his. I never thought I'd find someone out here, he admitted. The frontier's a lonely place most times. I was wrong about that, Willow said, about so many things. I thought being alone was the only way to survive, but you showed me that we need each other more out here, not less. He smiled, bringing her hand to his lips. Smart woman might make a rancher's wife someday. She laughed, the sound surprising her with its freedom and joy. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Mr. Kane. I still have a lot to learn about cattle. We have time, he said simply. All the time in the world. Standing there in the golden light of a Montana morning, Willow Hayes finally stopped running. The woman who had tried to leave the territory until a cowboy found a wanted poster had found something far more valuable than escape. She had found her way home. 1 year later, on a perfect spring day, Willow Hayes became Willow Kane in a ceremony attended by half the county. The ranch flourished under their joint care, expanding with new cattle and improved buildings. They built a life together on that Montana land, a life of hard work and simple pleasures, of mutual respect and deepening love. And if sometimes Willow woke in the night, momentarily gripped by old fears, Landon was always there to hold her until the shadows passed. The frontier had not broken her after all. It had led her to the place, and the man who could help her heal. In time, children came, first a daughter with Landon's blue eyes and Willow's determination, then twin boys who kept them both busy from dawn to dusk. Their home became known as a place of welcome, where travelers could find a hot meal and safe harbor in the still wild territory. The wanted poster that had changed everything was framed and hung in Landon's study, a reminder of how their paths had crossed and of the truth that had set Willow free. That even in the harshest wilderness, love could take root and flourish, if only given the chance.